In this section, we'll be taking your modeling skills to the next level, still keeping with the low poly style and introducing new modeling techniques as we go. We'll create a low poly modular dungeon. Now, modular scene building is creating a few objects and then combining them together to make a bigger scene. This is obviously very useful for building big scenes quickly and commonly used for making game environments. If you search for modular packs, you can find great examples from which you can download and build big environments with, and we're creating a pack just like this. Now, it could be argued there are some downsides to this type of modular modeling. With lots of the same object, you can get a lot of repetition, so your objects can't have any obvious distinguishing features, because if they have, it will be really obvious when it repeats. You can sometimes build an object that can be rotated, such as a barrel or crate, and we'll look at those shortly, and they give the illusion of difference when you turn them one direction and another, and especially when you place them next to each other. Also, you do get some overlap. So when the shapes and objects are placed together, they do sometimes intersect each other, and you often get what are called inside faces, which are wasted geometry. It's very common and it doesn't matter much these days, especially with the computer processing power that's available today. But it's not fully optimal, which could be seen as a slight disadvantage. However, the speed at which you can create big scenes is greatly increased, so often the fact that the geometry overlaps is ignored. So let's get started making a modular dungeon scene. In this lecture, we'll be creating a barrel to go into our modular environment. Okay, so let's start our barrel off by deleting the default cube. So I'll select that and press delete. Shift A to add, up to mesh and across to cylinder. Now at the moment it's quite dense, so I can come down to my add cylinder dialog box here and change the vertex count to 12. And as you can see, that makes it much more chunky and more low poly. Also the radius, we probably want this about 0.5 of a meter and the depth to be about 1.2. And that looks a good size for a barrel. I'll go to front view, zoom in a touch and press G to grab in the Z and move that up on top of my imaginary floor anyway. We'll put a floor in later, but it's a good idea to place our objects on top of the floor now. Just makes it easier later on. So let's move up slightly and into perspective mode. And let's start editing the barrel by going into edit mode with tab. So quickly pause the video here, catch up with me and create a cylinder with the same parameters as mine. So I want to create a sort of curved rounded shape. Just have a quick think to yourself about how you might go about doing that. Okay, so in order to make that shape, we will need some topology in here to kind of pull outwards and create a curve. Therefore, a loop cut would be very effective. So Control R for a loop cut, and I can move my mouse around my object to place that loop cut, and I want to place it around the middle. I can use the wheel of my mouse to create two. Incidentally, you can press Control plus or Control minus on your numpad instead of the wheel on your mouse, and I'll double left click to set that in place. Now currently I'm in vertex mode and I want to be in edge mode for the next bit, and I want to select the top loop, so Alt left click to select a loop of edges and Shift Alt left click to select the other loop as well. I can then press Scale, Shift Z, so I'm not scaling in the Z axis, and bring those outwards into a sort of rounded barrel shape like this. So pause the video and catch up with me, add two loop cuts and scale them outwards to create this sort of curvy barrel shape. Pause the video and have a go at that. Okay, so the next step is to create the metal brace that goes around the middle. I can use these loops that I already have selected, and to separate them out into two, I can use the bevel command. You can find that over here, but the shortcut, nice and easy to remember, is Control B. So Control B and then move my mouse to the side, and I'm creating some chunky braces like this. And something like that looks good. I can then extrude these out. So E to extrude, and then S to scale, but Shift Z so they don't scale in the Z axis. And then I can bring those faces outwards. So with those faces selected, E to extrude, S to scale, but Shift Z so they don't scale in the Z axis. So quickly pause the video here and extrude the metal braces. Okay, so what about the top and the bottom? Well, I'll come around to the top, go to face mode, select the top and the bottom, and I can use the I to inset command. So I to inset, and then we've got a top and bottom like this. I can now press E to extrude and scale in the Z axis, and that should bring both of them together towards the middle. So the top and the bottom. So E to extrude and then scale in the Z axis. You can of course do them one at a time, but if I do them together, I know they're exactly the same depth. Okay, so quickly extrude the top and the bottom of your shape. Pause the video and have a go at that. Now comes the sort of character element aspect. I call them the notches and the wobbles. For example, if I go to vertex mode with one, I can just select a vert, G to grab, and just give it a tiny bit of distortion. So just grabbing a few of these and moving them just a tiny bit to create that little bit of undulation and character. So our metal braces are now a tiny bit imperfect. I could do the same with the top. So maybe select some of these, maybe select a couple, just bring them down slightly, and a couple to bring up. Same with the bottom. So try and keep random and try and add just that little bit of undulation. So I'll go back to the top and I want you to pause the video here and create a bit of distortion or wobble in your barrel. Okay, what about some notches then? If I go to edge mode and select, let's say, an edge going here, I can use my bevel command again by pressing Ctrl B, bevel it out like this. I can use the wheel as well to create an edge down the middle, and then left click to set. Now what you have to be a bit careful of, if I come around to the side here, is that the bevel won't work if it goes beyond this point here. So I'll show you that once again. I'll undo it and do it again from this side and press Ctrl B to bevel, bring it down, and notice it stops at that point but keeps going on the sides until it gets to that vertex and then that vertex there and stops, and I can't go any further. We don't actually need to go as far as that point at the bottom there. We can go to here and that's absolutely fine. And remember, the wheel of your mouse will create that extra edge loop in the middle, and I can left click to set that. Now it's not actually a notch yet, but what I can do is I can select this edge here and press G to grab and bring it down. However, it's not quite in line, and we've got a little bit of distortion here where this face is flat and planar here and then it goes around the corner there. So I'll undo that. What we can do is called edge slide. But before I show you that, just quickly catch up with me, create a bevel on one of the edges around the top. Pause the video and have a go at that. Okay, so I want to do an edge slide, and I want to slide this vertex down to this point here, and on the other side, this one down to here. So if I go to vertex mode, come around to the front first, select this vert, I can press G to grab, and then G again to slide along each edge. And I can slide it all the way down to the other one. So I'll come around to here, and I'll select this one and press GG to edge slide and slide it down to the other one. Now you would think at this point that we've got one vertex here and one here, but actually we've got two here, one on top of the other, and two here as well. A vertex right on top of another one is known as a double. If I try selecting that vertex and press G to grab and move it, you can see that there are two there. So I'll undo that. I want to somehow merge these vertices together. Well, I can select all those, and in fact I could select the whole shape at this point. So A to select everything, and then I can press M to merge. You can select several and merge them at the center or at the 3D cursor, but by distance is the one I want to choose. So if I select that, you can see it's removed two vertices. So it's joined these two together and these two together, and therefore removed two. You can see the merge distance down here is extremely low. And if I bring this up, you can see it starts merging other vertices around the place which fit within this distance. So keeping it really low will only grab the two that are right on top of each other. So that's merging by distance. So pause the video, select your whole shape and press M to merge by distance, and just quickly experiment with the merge distance slider to see what happens, but always bring it right down to the bottom so it merges just those two. Pause the video and have a go at that. Okay, now there is a quicker way to do this. If I press Alt A and let's select a different edge, so this one here, 2 to go to edge mode, select that edge, and I can press Ctrl B to bevel. I'll create a slightly smaller bevel this time, and remember the wheel of my mouse will create that extra notch. Incidentally, you have your controls over here. You can create extra segments once you've set your bevel, set the width, and so forth. And for now, I'll just minimize my bevel command and come into the middle. I'll go to vertex mode, and I want to slide this one down to this one and merge them together. There's a tool up the top right here called Auto Merge Vertices. I'll select that, and I'll select this vertex here and press GG to edge slide and slide it down to this one. Now I'll deselect with Alt A and select that vert, and G to grab is just one vertex. I'll right click to cancel that though, so it's automatically merged any vertex that's on top of another one. So if I come around to here, press G to grab, press G twice to edge slide, bring it down to this one. It is very close to the other one, But as soon as I set that, press G to grab again, you can see that it's one vertex. So I'll right click to cancel that. I could of course press G to grab, double tap G again and slide it down to the other one and merge those. That's absolutely fine to have that, and that still works well. And to create a little bit of variation, I could go to edge mode and maybe G to grab, move that one across slightly so it's an unusual notch like this. And for more variation, Control B to bevel this one, bring it over to here, much smaller, and GG to edge slide, and GG to edge slide. And again, because I've got auto merge vertices, those vertices are merged together. So your challenge then is to create some notches within the top and the bottom of your barrel. Pause the video and have a go at that. Okay, so I'll just do the bottom. I'll select a random edge, Control B to bevel, bring that out into vertex mode and double tap G to merge those into the center there. Come around to the other side and the same there. And just continue doing that on some other points. So now we have an interesting looking barrel with some character. So hopefully you got an okay with that. As always, make sure you've saved your work, ready for next time. In this lecture, we'll be making a crate for our modular dungeon. Okay, so here's where we got up to last time, and I'll just select my barrel and rename it in the outliner, and I'll also hide it from the viewport by pressing the I. Then to create our crate, I'll press Shift-A to add, mesh, and then cube. Now before we edit it in any way, let's go to our parameters and change the size to 1.2. That way it will be exactly the same as the barrel, and therefore if we want to stack them up on top of each other, it will be much easier. Now let's go to front view, G to grab in the Z axis and move that above our imaginary floor. Remember you can hold down Shift for smaller increments. So somewhere around there looks good, and I'm ready to edit my cube. So pause the video here, catch up with me, add a cube that's 1.2 meters high and place it above your floor. Okay, so let's go into edit mode with tab, and I want to inset the faces to create the shape. So I'll come up to face mode here, press I to inset, but moving my mouse side to side, I'm getting no results. Well, if we look up the top, just above where my cursor is, you can see that there's lots of options. And there's I for individual. If I press I now and then move my mouse, you can see that changes to inset the individual faces. So I can bring it down to somewhere like here and left click. You can also see in the inset tools, there's the individual option. If I tick that and untick that, you can see the results. So quickly pause the video and inset all of the faces using that individual command. So pressing I twice. Okay, so now I want to extrude them inwards. Now don't follow along with this bit, but if I press E to extrude and then S to scale straight away, we can see that that kind of works, but you can see that it scales it down because it's scaling to that center point there, which is the middle of all the faces. So I'll undo that. Instead, if I come across to the extrude region tool options here, and remember you can press T to get rid of the toolbar and to show it again. And if I click and hold, there's other options and there's extrude along normals. To get to that option without using the toolbar, we press Alt E instead of the normal E to extrude. And there's extrude faces along normals. And if I click that and then move my mouse, they move inwards and outwards according to the direction of that face. So I'll move them into about there and left click. Now just to show that a bit more clearly, if I go up to the overlays here and scroll down to the normals just here and display normals, you can see lines which show the direction of the faces. And you can see the faces we've just pushed in and out, that direction is going along the normals as you can see there. So they've all extruded inwards the same distance according to their normals. I'll disable the display normals option. Incidentally, you can only find the normals option when you're in edit mode under the overlays. If I go to object mode and to the overlays, you can see it's a different menu. So back into edit mode and take a moment to catch up with me and extrude along the normals by pressing Alt E and then choosing that option. Pause the video and have a go at that. Okay, so now we want to make some slats in our wood. So if I press Ctrl R to do a loop cut around the object here, use my wheel to create two and double left click. I can also create some going this way as well. So Ctrl R, use my wheel, double left click. Now I can select all these edges on the inside around here and the ones on the top. I can either do that by just going around selecting them like this, which is relatively quick. And on the bottom, I can also hold down Shift, select the first one and Control Shift select the last one. That selects everything between the 2 points I've selected, taking the shortest route. So it will select the middle one as well. So this one, hold down Shift and Control Shift, left click on this one. So pick shortest path. It can be quite useful, that. Now I want to press Control B to bevel those and use the wheel of my mouse to create an extra loop in the middle. So probably somewhere around there. Now I can select the edges on either side and press S to scale in the X, and that will pull them into each other. I can only do it on either side because if I select these ones as well, then it will go into the center point and these ones will pull into each other. So it has to be the ones on opposite sides, and then I can press S then Y in this case and bring them in, and the top ones from here, Control click and then Shift and then Control click to select the shortest route. Don't worry if that's complicated to remember, you can always just hold down Shift and select them all, and scale in the Z axis this time to pull them upwards. And we can see now I've got these slats here. Let's go into object mode and see what that looks like. And we created those slats. So pause the video here and have a go at creating those slats on the inside of the crate. Okay, so now we've done that, we want to create some wobble. So back into edit mode, into vertex mode, and I can select a vert and press G to grab to move it slightly. And remember, this is very, very slight. However, it would be good to have a loop cut around the middle here as well, so I can create some tiny wobble and distortion across the middle. So Control R to do a loop cut, and I'll do 2 there as well, double left click. So I've got these edges that I can move around, and I'm moving them really slightly just to create a minor bit of distortion. On the slats here as well, that can be quite nice to create a little bit of variation in those as well. Now remember, this is very minor, especially when it comes to the very corners. Any major distortion like that can look a little bit unnatural. So I sped this bit up 5 times just so you can see what I'm doing and the adjustments I make. Okay, so having a good check around. Also, it's a good idea to go into object mode just to make sure that things are making sense. Possibly a little bit too much there. It's probably just on the edge, I think. That's probably just about right. Okay, so pause the video here and create a little bit of wobble and distortion on your crate. So the next thing to do, if I go into edit mode, is to create some notches. On the very corners, it's nice and easy. So if I select a corner here and zoom in on that a touch, I can press Control B to bevel. But when I move my mouse side to side, nothing happens. However, we have got some options down the bottom underneath my cursor there. And you can see the V key is at the moment affecting edges. So if I press V again, it will affect the vertices. And you can see that change underneath my cursor there. I can also use the wheel of my mouse to bring that down to just 1 and left click there. Now quickly, if I zoom in on this, you can see that this is an n-gon. And because it's non-planar, not flat, Blender has a lot of difficulty rendering it. And you can see how it's made a triangle here when rendering and here as well. So when Blender renders things, it creates triangles out of them if they're n-gons. And that's the same if you were to send this to a game engine or anything like that. We can actually create the triangles ourselves in here, or we can just leave it like this, because the closest we'll be to this crate is about here, and you don't really notice those problems from this distance. It's not something worth spending the time on at this particular point. And it's worth pointing out that there are a few other n-gons around the place, such as in here. We've once again got a face with lots of edges. As soon as you make these bevel cuts, you get those n-gons. They are absolutely fine unless they are on really big surfaces that are non-planar. Even then, it's okay as long as you're happy with the way that Blender is rendering it. Don't worry if that doesn't make too much sense. I'll talk more about that as we go through the course. So I'll select another couple of these and Control B and then V for vertex. Move that to the side. And rather than choosing them all at the same time, I'm choosing a few individually. Control B, then V, so that there's a bit of variation. And the last 2 around here. You don't have to have it on every point, but I think it kind of makes sense for a crate like this. And these ones can be quite small. So that's creating the bevels on the very corners like that. And if I go into object mode, you can see our crate's looking quite good. You can also create notches on the edges. If I select this vertex here and press Control B, then V again, and bring that out to somewhere like this. I'll zoom in on that with the period key. And you can see that Blender is showing this with a triangle across here. Because again, it's not planar, so it's not flat. And we need to tell Blender we want the triangle going this way. So this time we will actually have to select these 2 and press J to join to tell it that's the way we want the cut to go in our quad. If I zoom out again, you can see there's a nice big notch in there. Let's do that for a few more. So I'll select a few more around the place at random points. So Control B, V for vertex, and then I'll have to go in and make some edits. So these two here, J to join, these two here, J to join, and I've forgotten where the other ones are. Around the side here, J to join, and there's one here. And you can see that Blender has actually decided to interpret this the other way with the triangles of the quad. So I don't actually need to put a cut in here, but it's always best to be safe in those cases. So there we go, a few notches in my crate. Let's see what that looks like in object mode. And that's looking great. A nice sort of beaten up, bashed in crate. So your challenge then is to put some notches on the corners and the edges of your crate by using the bevel command with V for vertex. For the notches on the edges, you might need to join the two verts together with J. And once you've done that, make sure you've saved your work, ready for next time. In this lecture, we'll be making a pillar for our dungeon, and we'll be looking closely at the mirror modifier. So here's where we got up to last time. And as always, I need to rename my cube to crate. And again, click on the eye to hide that. For the pillar, we'll add a new cube. So Shift A to add, mesh, and then cube. Come around to front view, and I'll zoom out just a touch. And let's think about the height of a pillar. So the average door height is about 2 meters. An average ceiling height is about 2.3 meters. It does depend a lot on where you live in the world, but I would say we want our dungeon to be slightly taller because we might have some strange beasts within it. So if we go to 3 meters for our pillars, that will give us enough height to put in a slightly bigger door than normal and enough room for our beasts not to bang their heads. So I'll press G, Z, then 1 to move this above the floor and press enter. And let's scale it down so it's pillar size. So scale Shift Z and then scale it down. And I want a fairly chunky pillar, so somewhere around here, I think. So not quite a meter. And if you want to copy my dimensions, if I press N on my keyboard and go up to item, you can actually see the dimensions there, not the scale, but the dimensions. And you can see that it's 70 centimeters. So take a moment to catch up with me, add in a cube and resize it so it's roughly the same as me. It doesn't have to be precisely the same. So pause the video and catch up with me. So notice that I haven't changed the height yet. The reason I haven't done that, if I press S to scale in the Z, it will move off the floor and I'll need to reposition it again. It's not too bad, but I can do that in edit mode. So if I go to edit mode, I need to select the top face and move it upwards. But selecting the top face is actually a bit tough in front view. I can obviously come around to the top here, press 3 on my keyboard and select the top face. But I'll undo that for a moment and I'll stay in front view. This is a good reason to move across to something like wireframe, because now I can actually select the top face by box selecting it. If I deselect all with Alt A and go to solid mode, I can't do that. You'll see that it's just selected the front face. So back to front view, into wireframe, and select the top face, and you can see I can select it now. So GZ1, and it will move it up so it's 3 meters tall, and I'll press enter. Now my pillar is symmetrical from the top to the bottom, so it's got a symmetry line down the middle here. So this is a good opportunity to introduce the mirror command. If I press Ctrl R and do a loop cut down the middle, that's going to be my mirror line. I'll go back to front view. And to use the mirror effectively, I need to delete half my shape, add the mirror modifier, and then just work on one half. So back to face mode with 3, I'll select all the top faces. Remember, I can do that in wireframe mode. Back to front view, and press delete, and delete faces. So pause the video here and catch up with me. Resize your cube in edit mode so it's 3 meters tall, and then cut it in half with a loop cut, and delete the top half. Pause the video and have a go at that. Okay, now before adding the mirror modifier, one important aspect to consider is where my object center is. That's the point at which the mirroring happens. So we will need to move this in a moment so it's sitting up here. But we can do that before or after we've added the mirror modifier, it doesn't matter. So let's go across to the modifier tab here, modifier properties, which we in the UK call a spanner, wrench if you're American, up to add modifier, and the mirror is in the middle of generate. So I'll tick that. Now the mirror is actually working at the moment, but it's in the wrong axis. So it's mirroring along the x-axis. So whatever happens on this side will happen on this side. Now because we've got a shape that is already symmetrical and not cut in half this way, it's copying, let's say, this vertex here over to the other side, and the one on this side over to the other side. So we have this shape on top of itself at the moment. I can show you that by going to vertex mode with 1, selecting one of these vertices here. and pressing G to grab. And you can see it's mirroring to the other side along this line. So I'll undo that and I'll come over to the modifier and turn on the Z instead of the X. So I'll turn the X off as well. And now's a good time for you to catch up with me, add the mirror modifier and turn off the X and turn on the Z. Pause the video and have a go at that. Now we can see that the bottom of our shape is mirrored up to here, but we obviously want it up to the top here. That's because our object origin, the point which it is mirroring around, is not at this point here. It's down here, so it's between these 2 points. Have a quick think how we can move the object origin. Well, there's 2 ways. I can grab my whole shape, don't follow along with this though, and press G to grab in the Z axis and move it down, and you can see we've got our mirror around that object origin up the top there. But obviously that's moving my shape downwards, so I don't really want to do that. So I'll right click to cancel that movement, and I have to go back to object mode and go up to the options here and affect only origins. This will only work in object mode, it won't work in edit mode. If I go to edit mode now and go to the options, you have a very different menu. So back to object mode, and then if I press G then Z, I'm only affecting the object origin now, and I can bring it up to the middle there. I could obviously zoom in and try and get it really accurately, but it won't make too much difference at this point. So that's great, we've got our mirror happening, so I can turn off my origins. And now if I go back into edit mode, any changes I make on this side, let's select these verts here, press G to grab, you can see it's mirroring up the top. So I'll right click to cancel that. So pause the video here and move your origin point. Remember you need to be in object mode to do that, and go into the options menu on the top right. Now the next thing that's very useful is to turn on what's called clipping. That will clip or stick your shape together. So notice when I press G to grab, I was able to pull it downwards. Now when I press G to grab, it just moves side to side. So they are stuck together in those middle points, which is obviously what we want. We don't want to have a big hole in the middle. So at this point, I can start editing the bottom of my shape and it will affect the top. So if I select these down here, I can press G to grab and it will update on the top. So quickly take a moment to catch up with me and turn on the clipping and just have a go at moving your shapes apart, make sure they are clipped together. Okay, so what we want to do now then is start editing our pillar. So if I do a loop cut around the bottom here, left click to apply it, and then bring it down to somewhere around here, I think, and left click again. And I want my middle section to be scaled inwards so that there will be a ledge here. If I go to face mode and select all those and press S and Shift Z, so it doesn't scale in the Z axis, you can see that's not quite working. I haven't got a ledge. So instead I can extrude and scale Shift Z to bring them in like this. So remember you need to extrude your shape to create those ledges. So I'll left click there. So just quickly catch up with me and do an extrusion, then scale it inwards but not in the Z axis. Now I want 3 sections to my pillar. So if I press Ctrl R to do a loop cut, left click, and it doesn't matter too much about the position here because we can easily change it in a moment. But around here is fine. So left click again to set. Now I want to create a small section in here. So if I press Ctrl B to bevel, I can create a bevel, use the wheel of my mouse to create an extra loop in the middle there, and left click. Then select that edge loop going around the middle here. So make sure you're in edge mode with 2. I can actually box select that edge loop there, or I can hold down Alt and left click and then scale those inwards. And now I've got a sort of pillar shape like this. Let's go to front view again. I'd like another small indentation here, so it looks like this is a big stone on top of a big stone here. But I can't very easily select this one and bevel that because it kind of goes around the corner, which is a little bit awkward. So it starts coming across this ledge. Instead, it can be a bit easier than that. If I go to front view, press Ctrl R, left click to set that and bring a loop cut down to somewhere around here. Now if I Alt left click on this loop here, I can scale that inwards, and that creates a look as if it's a stone on top of a stone just there. So pause the video and catch up with me creating 3 separate stones like I have here, using loop cuts and bevels. Okay, let's see what that looks like in solid mode. Now it's not bad, but it doesn't quite look right at the moment. Well, it's nice and easy to edit these things. So let's go to front view again. I'll go back to wireframe. I think first of all, I want it a bit more chunky. So I'll select the whole shape with A and scale Shift Z to make it a bit more chunky. So maybe out to about here. So it's around 1 meter wide. Let's go back into solid mode and see what that looks like. That's more of the chunky pillar that I'm looking for. I think it would be great as well to add a tiny bit more detail to this pillar. So back into front view, into wireframe, and I'm going to do a loop cut around the base here. So Control R, left click to somewhere around here, I think. And then go to face mode, select these bottom faces, and E to extrude, S to scale, Shift Z so it doesn't scale in the Z axis, and then we can have this sort of wider section out here. And that looks a bit more interesting, I think. Let's see what that looks like in solid mode. I feel like the top and the bottom are a bit too thick now, so I'll scale those inwards. I can grow my selection with Control plus on my numpad. Remember that's under the select option here, more or less. So if I include all these faces here, press S to scale, Shift Z, and move my mouse in slightly, I can edit it like this. And that looks quite fun. So pause the video here and catch up with me, editing your shape slightly so it's similar to mine. Just try and get the rough shape. Don't worry if it's not exactly the same. Okay, so a final challenge to you now then is to create two pillars just like this one. That way we'll have a bit of variation when it comes to our dungeon. Try and make them a slightly different shape. Don't worry if you don't feel confident, you can always follow along with me with the changes I make in a moment. So pause the video and have a go at that. Okay, so I'll go back into object mode and round to front view, and I'll zoom out just a touch, and I'll press Shift D to create a duplicate of this one, and then X2, so it moves across 2 Blender units to the side here, and press enter, and then I can come into edit mode and start editing the shape. I can do this in front view or perspective view, it doesn't matter too much. Let's see what it looks like if the stones are a little bit shorter. So I'm in face mode at the moment, so I can select this face loop here and this one here, and G then Z to move those up. And I think I prefer that already. Let's go into object mode then, Shift D, X2. Oh, I accidentally pressed 3, so G, X, -1 to move it back. And then zoom in, and maybe I'll make the middle brick a little bit wider, just to see what it looks like. So into edit mode, select that face there, scale it up so it's a bit wider like this, and let's see what that looks like. That's quite interesting as well. And perhaps for some more variation, I'll edit this so it goes even higher, so G then Z, and there we've got 3 pillars, which look fairly interesting. So hopefully you got an okay with that. As always, make sure you've saved your work, ready for next time. In this lecture, we'll be adding the details to our pillar, looking a bit more at the bevel command and applying our mirror. Okay, so here's where we got up to last time. And the first thing I want to do is select all my pillars and move them to a new collection. Quick challenge to you then is to move these into a collection called pillars. Pause the video and have a go at that. Okay, so hopefully you remembered you can press M to move to new collection, click new collection, and I'll call this pillars, and press enter to set those. And I've got my collection here. You've also got up the top here, if I middle mouse button to move across this menu, you've got the add collection there, and I could have done it that way as well. I'll just move that menu back, and I'll select on the original, zoom in on that with period key, and get ready to apply some details. Now the first thing to note that it's still got the mirror modifier on, so anything I add to the bottom will obviously happen on the top. Now when you're adding this sort of damaged details, like notches and wobbles, you don't really want it repeated from top to bottom, so you don't want to use the mirror modifier there. Therefore we need to apply this modifier to add that kind of damaged detail. In order to do that, we come across the modifier, and the drop down is here, and there's the apply option. Just a quick note though, if I go into edit mode and then come across to my modifier, it's grayed out because we can't apply modifiers in edit mode. So back to object mode, and just be aware I'm bringing my mouse over the 3D viewport to go in and out of edit mode. I can't do that from over here. If I press tab, nothing happens. But now I'm in object mode, I can now come up to the drop down and press apply. Now another thing to be aware of, if I go into edit mode now, and let's say I choose to modify the shape slightly, so I'll go to edge mode with 2, and let's say select this top edge here, because I think moving this up slightly, G then Z, gives a slightly better aesthetic. But of course it's not changing on the bottom, so I would need to actually go in and make the changes on the bottom as well. So G then Z and move that down. So now we have the ability to affect top and bottom individually. There's also a drawback with that, in the fact that if I wanted to make any big modifications to the shape, then I would have to do it in 2 halves. To get the mirror modifier back, I will have to delete half my shape and re-add the mirror modifier. So you've got to try and make sure that you don't want to make any big changes to your shape before applying that modifier. So pause the video here and apply the mirror modifier for this pillar. Now another slight issue, if I press 1 on my keyboard, choose this vertex down here, and I'll zoom in on that. If I press Ctrl B to bevel and V for vertex, you can see that it's acting a little bit strangely. I'll left click to apply, but you can see that across here is much shorter than the distance down here. I'll go back into object mode and press N on my keyboard and go up to item. That's because our scale is non-uniform. The Z scale, so up and down, is much bigger than the X and Y. And the X and Y going across this way, the Z going this way. So Blender is taking into account this scale when I'm using tools such as the bevel. And that can feel quite strange and awkward. I'll just quickly undo those changes and go back into object mode. And we can apply this scale by pressing Ctrl A, and we get the apply menu, and there's the scale there. Or we can go up to object, apply, and the scale is just there. Watch what happens to the numbers in the transform menu. When I click scale, they all reset to 1. It hasn't changed my dimensions, the pillar is the same size, but it has set the scale to 1, saying this is its natural scale. Now when I go into edit mode, Ctrl B and then V, the bevel is acting as you'd expect. But I'll undo that bevel for now, and what I want you to do is catch up with me and apply your scale. Remember, you need to be in object mode to do that, and the shortcut key is Ctrl A. Pause the video and have a go at that. Okay, now we're ready to add a few details. So I'll zoom out just a touch. I'll go into edge mode this time, and in the previous lectures I started with creating that wobble or distortion in the shape. I'm going to do that a bit later because I'll show you a quick shortcut for that. This time we're going to start with the bevels and notches. So I'll select the edge from here, let's say down to here, by holding down Control and left clicking. That takes the shortest route, and then Control B to bevel and bring that out to somewhere like this. That will give me some sharp edges and some worn edges. So it's still got this sort of chunky low poly look with some damage. Let's try going from this one up to this one with Control left click, and I'll zoom in on that with period key, and I'll press Control B to bevel. Now what you might want to be aware of is if you go up to the top where they're touching, it sort of clamps and then goes a bit wider. It doesn't matter too much, but I'm just making you aware that the vertices are kind of hitting each other there. And you would expect actually if I hit that vertex there, left click to apply it and go to vertex mode, that single vertex up there, because we've got auto merge vertices on, if I press G to grab now, they should be joined. But for some reason they're not actually right on top of each other. But if I press G twice and do an edge slide and just make sure that it hits the other one like this, you can kind of see a quick flicker when it snaps like this. Now they're both joined, because if I click it again and press G to grab, they're joined together. I'll undo those changes though, and just do a minor bevel, so Control B to bevel, and just bring it out to somewhere like this. So I think a bevel about that distance looks a bit better than a wider one. Although I can still go back in, select that vert there and GG to edge slide and bring it up if I want to keep the shape a little bit simpler. It doesn't matter too much though. So I'll zoom out a bit, back to edge mode, and just make a few more of those kind of bevels like that. So Control B to bevel and bring those out, maybe right from the base here up to here. And just being fairly random with this. So we've got some bevels there, and it's making it look kind of wonky in some ways. Let's select a few vertices to bevel as well. So I'll press 1 and hold down Shift across my shape and maybe get a few vertices that I can bevel. I don't think it's worth selecting one that's already been beveled, like this one here, just ones that have a sharp edge to them. And again, press Control B and this time V to do the vertices, and I can bring those out like this. Now if I select two that are next to each other and press Control B, it thinks that I want to bevel that edge. So just be aware of that. I'll press Escape to undo that and select these one at a time, Control B and V. In fact, I'll leave that one sharp, just for the sake of interest. And maybe one more in here, Control B and then V, a small bevel like this. Now if I choose one that's already been beveled, like this one here, that's joined in, and Control B then V, you can see it's getting a little bit strange around here now, because we've got these extra vertices in here. So you could argue that doesn't quite look right, but it does kind of work as some sort of damage. It's up to you whether you do that or not. I'll undo that though, and let's go into object mode and see how it's looking. Looks like a kind of bashed in pillar, and that's working reasonably well. So your challenge then is to add some bevels around your pillar, using both the edge bevel and the single vertex bevel. Once you've finished that for this pillar, I want you to do the same process for the other two. Remember to apply the mirror for both of them and apply the scale for both of them as well before making your edits. So pause the video and have a go at that. Okay, so hopefully you got an okay with that. So I'll start working on the next two, and when applying the scale, you can actually apply it to both pillars at the same time. So I can select both those, and then Control A and apply the scale. And you can see now if I click on each of these, they both got uniform scale of 1. However, I can't do that with the mirror. If I select both, this one's highlighted in yellow, so it's the active object. And if I come across and press apply, if I select this one now, it's still got the mirror. So it only applies the modifier for the active object. So with this one selected, I'll also apply that. Now for adding my detail, I can actually go in and select both these at the same time and go into edit mode to edit them. It doesn't really speed things up that much, as you've still got to go into the individual shapes, but it's something to be aware of. Also, you do have to be a bit careful because sometimes you're focused on this one and you've got something selected on the other one and it's having the same effect. So if I press Control B now to bevel, it's beveling both of my pillars. So just be aware of that. So I'll go into edge mode and maybe come right down to here with Control left click and Control B to bevel. Let's select a few at the same time this time to speed things up from here to here, from here to here, and from here to here. Maybe this one as well, from here to here, this edge here, and these two here. And then Control B to bevel. Somewhere around there, I think. That looks good. It's not quite as beveled as this one, so it's got that individual elements to it. I might select this very top edge here as well. Control B to bevel a tiny bit there. Now let's go into vertex mode and select a few individual vertices. So just going around, shift clicking some of these vertices that are sticking out, and Control B then V to bevel. That looks good. Back into edge mode and I'll do a similar thing for this one. Control B to bevel. This one looks a tiny bit interesting because there's an extra loop cut in the middle here, so we've got a bevel and a kind of chunk taken out here, which I think looks quite fun. So I'll speed up the process of this one as it's more of the same. I'm about 5 times speed now. And I'm just beveling the edges. Now I'm going in and selecting single vertices and then Control B and then V to bevel the vertices. So back into object mode, see how we're getting on, and that's looking quite interesting. So hopefully you got an okay with that. Do make sure you've saved your work ready for next time. In this lecture we'll be adding some detail to our pillars using the bisect and the knife tool. So here's where we got up to last time, and let's work on our original again. I'll zoom in with the period key on my numpad and go into edit mode. Now simple notches on a single point such as this are quite straightforward. We can press Control B and then V to bevel those, so probably somewhere around there. I'll zoom in on that, and Blender has interpreted this in the correct way, so we've got a triangle here and here, rather than having a triangle across here. But it's always good to select both these vertices and press J to join to confirm to Blender that's what we want, and we've got a nice simple notch there. So that works for individual points that are on an edge like this, but there aren't many of them around. What if I want to take an edge like this instead? So I'll go to edge mode, select that edge and Control B to bevel, use my wheel and left click to set. Then I can go in, go to vertex mode and select one of these inside ones, GG to edge slide, and remember you must have the auto merge vertices to make sure they merge together. Then I'll select this one, GG, and slide that across the other one. And we've got another notch there. What about if I want to change the height? Well, I can select all these and G then Z because it's nice and flat, and move that up to somewhere around there. Alternatively, if I wanted to take this edge and bevel it, I can edge slide them first, so GG to edge slide to bring them down, and I'll press E for even, so it mirrors the top one, which is flat, and bring them somewhere down to here, and then I can, once again, into edge mode, Control B to bevel, and make a small bevel there. I'll zoom in on that, and select the verts, and slide them across. So we've got a very chipped pillar here, and that works well for the middle because we had that extra edge around the center there. So take a moment to catch up with me and create some notches in the middle stone, but only the middle stone for the moment. Pause the video and have a go at that. What about if I try and make an edge around here? So Control R to go to loop cut, and for some reason it's not working. It's kind of working when I go around to here, but not here. So I'll press escape on that and cancel it. That's because the loop cut will only go through quads, and a quad is a face with 4 edges. So we've got quads going from here all the way round to this one here. But when we come round to here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is an n-gon. And again, when I press Ctrl R, you can see it going around the back where those quads are, but it won't go through this n-gon here. It's trying to make a point just there. So I'll press Escape to cancel that. There's a couple of tools we can use here, and they're both on the side here under the knife option. So I'll show you the knife tool first, and you can see the keyboard shortcut for that is K, so that's nice and easy to remember. So if I press K and I want to create a cut around the middle here, when I move my knife cursor over an edge, you can see it highlights that edge and kind of snaps to it. And when I go to a vertex, it highlights red and snaps to that as well. The knife tool is generally more comfortable when it's snapping to vertices like this, but you can perform a cut on an edge as well. So I'll click on this edge with left click, and then you can see it's creating a cut to the next one, and I'll left click there, to the next one, left click there, and you can see it making these red dots. I can still move around my viewport using the middle mouse button and go all the way around, left clicking on each of these edges until I get to the end. And then I can click on that end point there and press enter. And it's created a cut all the way around the middle. Now, of course, your bottom stone will look slightly different to mine, but even if you haven't got any n-gons in that bottom stone, I'd like you to try out using the knife tool to cut a loop around the middle. Pause the video and have a go at that. Okay, I'll come back to this in a moment and we'll create some notches in there, but I want to show you the other aspect of the knife tool. If I click and select the bisect tool, and this one doesn't seem to have a keyboard shortcut, so you have to use the tool. And I'll come around to the top here, at the front here, and before using the bisect, you have to select vertices, edges or faces that you want to be affected. So if I press A to select all, then I can draw a line across my top stone like this. And you can see that going all the way around here. You can also see that I've got this gizmo here, and I can click and drag and move that up and down. I can also clear the inner, which clears the bottom underneath this arrow, or clear the outer, which clears the top. That creates a gap which I could also fill in. So you can actually cut an object using the bisect tool. But I don't want to use that, I want to just create a loop cut around the middle like this. And the bisect tool does that nicely. So I'll go back to my selection tool now. I can then go into edge mode, and when I click on an edge, we lose that gizmo and I can start affecting my shape. So pause the video here and bisect the top stone, creating a loop cut all around it. Okay, so now I can start creating some notches. So Control B to bevel on this one. About there looks good. And in fact, I shouldn't keep this right in the middle. I'll press G then Z to move that up. So there's a notch up here. I'll zoom in on it, go to vertex mode and select these ones, GG to edge slide and GG to edge slide. And I'll do one around the other side here. So I'll select this single vert and I can press Control B then V for vertices, or I can actually press Control Shift B and that will go straight to beveling a vertex. I'll use my wheel to bring that down so it's only one bevel, and left click there. I'll zoom in to select these 2 points and press J to join, and that creates the notch. That looks good. Let's edit the bottom as well now. I'll just create one on this edge here so as not to overdo it. So 2 to go to edge mode, select that edge, Control B to bevel, use the wheel of my mouse to create an extra cut, zoom in on that, into vertex mode and GG to edge slide and GG to edge slide. Do remember to check that you've got your auto merge vertices on so they join together. Okay, so I've got a few notches in there now as well. Let's go to object mode and see how that pillar is looking. And I think that looks great. So pause the video here and catch up with me creating notches around your pillar. Then as your challenge, I want you to do the same on the other two. Remember to use the knife tool and the bisect tool to get used to both of those. Okay, so I'll select on the other two and go into edit mode. And if I select all and come around to the front, I can use the bisect tool and cut across both of them at the same time. And I've created a nice cut round there. That's nice and simple. I did say to practice the knife tool though, so let's do that at the top. K for knife tool and just create a cut all the way around the top like this. Incidentally, with the knife tool, if I zoom in just a touch, you can go from this one here, let's say, all the way around to this one, and that will create a cut in between. Now something's gone wrong here. There's a slight glitch and I can Control Z to undo a cut, but it's just gone completely haywire and all over the place because as I was moving around the shape, it got confused as to where I was. So I'll just escape that, come back to the front here and press K and move around. And like I was saying, you can jump to the next one like this. So going across to 1, 2 there and left click. But you can see that that did create a little bit of confusion for my knife tool. So if I go to this one, it's created an extra cut in there for me, and I can probably go back to the beginning, but it's always safer to make absolutely sure by cutting those edges manually all the way around. So I've gone all the way around, I can now press enter, and it's managed it. So watch out for those glitches, especially if you're going across a few edges. I'll do the same on this one, and I'll see if I can replicate the glitch. So I'll come around to here and come across to here. Oh no, it's actually working. It's doing well. It doesn't look like we'll be able to replicate it in this one. It's done a cut all the way around and it's done well. I'll press enter on that. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. To make sure it works, make sure you are clicking on every single edge as you go around. So now that I've got my two cuts here, I can start selecting single verts and Control Shift B to use the bevel command. Big notch there. Period key on my numpad to zoom in and select both those. And you can see that this one, Blender has interpreted the triangles the other way and it's very confused with it. But as soon as I press J, that sorts it out. I'll come around to the other side, Control Shift B there as well. I know I didn't notice that this was an edge, but that's okay because I can just GG to edge slide that, join those ones together, and J to join there. So it's got a notch not across both edges, which works fine. Okay, so I'll just go around editing some of these. And once again, I've sped this up 5 times, it's all the same process. You might occasionally want to slide a vertex down to change its position and then create a notch out of it. Try and be fairly random with the positioning and try not to go too much over the top with this. Too much damage could look a little bit strange. And there we go. I think that's working nicely. Now I'll just quickly go back into edit mode just to remind you that you may still have the bisect tool on. It's a good idea to turn that back to the select box, because if we have that on and I sort of click somewhere, you can see that it's trying to use the bevel tool. So I'll go back to the selection tool and I'll deselect all, back to object mode, and we've got some great looking pillars. So hopefully you got an okay with that. Make sure you've saved your work, ready for next time. In this lecture, I'll give you a quick look at the randomize command to add wobble to our pillars, and we'll be adding materials to our objects. So here's where we got up to last time, and I think our pillars are looking really nice. I'm going to show you how you can add a little bit of wobble and distortion to them. You may want to do it, you may not. It's entirely up to you. You may feel that you don't want any more distortion on your pillars, and that's absolutely fine. But if I select all of them and go to edit mode, and in vertex mode, so one on my keyboard or vertex mode up here, I can select all with A. Now if I come to front view, I don't really want to affect the top vertices and the bottom vertices, because I want those stuck to the floor and the ceiling ones to be flat. So I'll go into wireframe or X-ray mode. I'll choose wireframe this time and control box select the top verts and holding down control box select the bottom verts. I'll go back to solid mode so it's easy to see the results. And we're going to use the randomize tool, which is under the mesh menu here, then into transform, and there's randomize there. Now when I click that, it goes very distorted. So we can change the amount down here to something like 0.01, I think is best. And press enter. You could go a tiny bit above that, so 0.02. You can even go minus numbers. If you didn't like the positive, you can go the other way. But I think 0.1 works really nicely. So there we have a bit of distortion to our shape. I'll go back into object mode so we can see that. It's very minor, but it just adds a little bit of character. Okay, so pause the video here and catch up with me adding a little bit of randomization to your shape. If you don't like it, you can always undo it, but just go through the process so you can see the possibilities. Okay, so now I'm going to give you a challenge of adding a material to our stone pillars. I think a mid to dark grey would work best, so pause the video and have a go at that. Okay, so hopefully you got an okay with that, and that you remembered we go across to the shading workspace. I'll come around to the front and zoom in a touch. I've got all of them selected at the moment, but if I add a new material and call this grey, come up to the top and change the base colour to a sort of mid to dark grey somewhere around here, it only affects the active object, the one in yellow. I can select on another one, go to the drop down and choose the grey, or I can link materials by clicking on the object I want to copy to first and then the active object being the one you want to copy from last. So you can choose as many of these as you like, and then the one you want to copy from you must select last because that becomes the active object. Then we press Ctrl L to link materials, and we can see it linked there. So pause the video here and copy your material to the other pillars with Ctrl L. Okay, now I want you to add some ambient occlusion and screen space reflections to our scene. Pause the video and see if you can remember how to do that. So I'll go over to the render properties here, and I'm in the render engine Eevee. I can add some ambient occlusion, and that fills in some shadows in the crevices, and screen space reflections. That doesn't offer too much, but if we had a reflective object, which we will with the barrel in a moment, that will make a big difference. Okay, so it's looking quite good, but I think the material, if I scroll down a bit, needs a bit more roughness. I think it looks a lot better if we bring the roughness up to around 0.85, somewhere around there. And I think a softer look like this works really well for low poly objects. If I bring the roughness back up, that shininess often hits flat faces like this, and I find that a bit distracting. So I tend to put the roughness just above 0.8. So pause the video here and just see what that looks like on your model, turning the roughness up to above 0.8. Okay, so what about our other objects, the barrel and the crate? I'll bring those back in. So they're right in the center there, right on top of the other ones. So we'll just zoom out just a touch, and I'll move them across in the x-axis, so gx -2 for the crate, and for the barrel, gx -4. So we've got a little bit of distance in between our objects. Okay, so a quick challenge for you is to add a brown material for the crate first. Pause the video and have a go at that. Okay, so I'll select on the crate, add a new material, I'll call this brown, and I'll come up to the top and change the color. Now this is not as easy as it might seem. You might have struggled a tiny bit with this. If we choose the base color, the brown is down the corner here, although at the moment that looks like orange, but if we bring the value down slightly, suddenly it looks more browny colored. So brown is kind of just dark orange, which people are often surprised by. Also, let's turn the roughness up a little bit, so to just above 0.8, and that looks quite nice. And you might want to tinker with this. I tend to spend a little time getting the browns right. I like a slightly sort of more yellowy, softer brown like this, maybe a tiny bit lighter, somewhere around there. And I might even tinker with this a little bit more later when I bring it into the scene. Okay, so your final challenge then is to texture the barrel. We need 2 texture slots for this. 1, the wood that we've already used for the crate, and 2, a metal for the brackets. So pause the video and have a go at that. Okay, so I'll select my barrel, and I'll start by giving it the brown texture, which all looks fine. Then I'll come to the slots here, add a new slot, and create a new material for that slot, and call it metal grey. But obviously that's having no effect because we need to go into edit mode and choose the faces we want to assign. I'll zoom in on my object, go to front view and wireframe, interface mode, and select these faces and shift box select these faces. Now I can come to the slots and click assign. I'll go back to material preview mode so we can see that that's taken effect. And now we can start changing the color to something like a gray, put the metallic all the way up, and maybe the roughness down just a touch. Oh, and there seems to be some sort of glitch there. I'll just go to object mode and see what's going on. Oh, that is working. It just seems a little bit dark. Let's change the base color. So I'm not sure what that glitch was. It seems to be a glitch when I go into edit mode and not a problem when I go into object mode. That's an unusual glitch. I haven't seen that before in Blender. I'll leave that in just in case you come across the same thing, but you can see when we go to object mode that it's not a problem. So let's zoom out and see how we're getting on with our objects, and they look really great. So as always, make sure you've saved your work, ready for next time. In this lecture, we'll be creating the walls, and we'll be talking a little bit about optimization. So before building the walls, it's worth going through a couple of methods of making them. The first method is building a few blocks and then repeating them over and over and kind of literally building a wall. This is a relatively quick way of building a wall. The alternative is to have a flat plane, as you can see here, and just kind of extrude out sections of it. The big advantage to this way is that it takes less polygons. You don't need a kind of back side to it unless you need both sides of the wall. And then of course you can just mirror this. If we take a closer look as well, if I go to edit mode and select those faces, you can see that there's 308 triangles. It may end up being slightly more if you were to send this to a game engine, because we have a few n-gons in here which would need to be triangulated, but roughly around 300-ish. Incidentally, I'm able to see these statistics over here by coming up to the overlays and turn on statistics just there. If I select the other bricks over here and go into edit mode and select all of those, you can see that this is 800 triangles. So it's over doubles, showing that the flat plane is a lot more efficient. Having said that, neither of these have a huge amount of polygons, And both ways would be acceptable in a game engine, especially with the advancements being made in processing power and graphics cards. You'd see little difference in performance between the two unless you were duplicating this wall hundreds and hundreds of times. So we'll be working on making it as a flat plane like this. It will also help to improve your skills with box modeling. So this is where we got up to last time, and I'll go across to layout mode to create the wall. I'll hide the barrel and the crate for now, come around to the front slightly and think quickly about the size of the walls. I think between this pillar and this pillar looks a good size for a wall, and that is 1, 2, 3, 4 meters. If I select the middle one for now and press GX-4, I can move it across to the side here and use this as a reference for the size of the pillars. It gives me a bit of an indication about the size of the blocks to use, and these two are nicely set up as the two ends if I need those. But for now I'll actually hide those two by selecting those, and I can always come over to here and press the I, or I can press H to hide. And I can bring those back if I want to see what my wall is looking like fitting between my two pillars. I'll press Shift A to add, mesh and then plane, and I'll change the size to 4 meters. Now I can actually change the rotation here to make it flat, so rotate around the X 90 degrees, but I'm going to keep that at 0 for now and leave it flat and press RX90, so it's actually been rotated 90 degrees. So if I press N on my panel and go to item, you can see the rotation is there. That will become slightly important later on and something that I want to show you. But for now, let's go to front view, G to grab in the X2 to move it across 2, and G to grab in the Z2. So we're definitely sitting above the floor there. I'll go into edit mode with tab, edge mode with 2, select that top edge, GZ-1, and we know it's 4 meters by 3 meters. I can always check that by going to object mode and looking at the dimensions here. I'll press N to get rid of that panel though. So pause the video and catch up with me, add in your plane and hide your two pillars on either sides. And if you like, have one pillar off to the side as a reference. Those things aren't too important because we can move those around later. So I'll go into edit mode with my plane and I want to cut this up. So Control R to do a loop cut, and I'll create 3 loop cuts here and double left click. So I'll have a top and the bottom, which will be really big, long stones, and then the middle will be made up of bricks. So if I go to face mode with 3, I can select the top and the bottom. I'll come around to the side and I'll press E to extrude and extrude that outwards slightly, so we've got a sort of ledge there. You might also want a tiny bit of a ledge at the top and the bottom, like we have with our pillars. So I can always press Control R and do a loop cut, bring that up to there, Control R, loop cut, and down to here. Interface mode with 3, select the top face and the bottom face, extrude in the Y and bring those out slightly. And we've got those tiny ledges. I don't need these faces at the end here. They're just going to be taken up by a pillar which this wall will overlap. So I can select these faces here and delete them. So delete then faces, because they're not important and they'll just be a waste of polygons. So I'll come around to the side here. And if I go into X-ray mode, I can box select these at the end here and press delete faces. I'll turn off X-ray mode and come around to front view with one on my numpad, and let's zoom in on our shape, and I'm ready to cut the brick pattern in. But before I do that, it's a good time to catch up with me. Make sure that you've got some extrusions at the top and the bottom, and that you've deleted these side faces. Pause the video and have a go at that. Okay, so I'll go back to the front view with 1 on my keyboard and start cutting in some shapes. Now, if I go to the knife tool now and press K to cut, and I want to cut from this point down to here, and left click, it's not creating a cut. So I'll press escape from that. That's because it's selecting from this edge down to this edge rather than the one underneath. So if I go to front view and press 5 to go to perspective view, I can actually see that edge underneath. Now when I go to the knife tool, I can cut from that edge down to here and left click, and it's working. I can also right click now and create another cut just here, left click and right click and keep going. So right click enables you to make a new cut. So I can go along creating my brick pattern or stones just here, and I can go to the bottom as well with that offset. They don't have to be really straight. They can be a little bit wobbly because that adds to the character. On the last one, I press enter and I've got my brick pattern there. So pause the video here and create your brick pattern with the knife tool. Okay, so I'm in face mode still, and I can select these middle faces and press I to inset, but that insets them all together. When I press I again, that insets the individual faces. Don't go too far with this, because if I do go too far, you can see that flickering on the right hand side. That's because it's overlapping itself. It's also happening on the far left as well. So if I come back to somewhere around here, I would say, and left click, I can actually change the depth here as well and bring those bricks outwards slightly. So 5 centimeters looks about right there. I can always press G to grab in the Y as well, move them out slightly, if for any reason you've lost your tools here. But that's another handy thing about the inset, is that you can change the depth once you've added it. Okay, so catch up with me and create an inset for each of your faces and pull them out slightly so they have some depth to them. Okay, so your challenge then is to add some distortion or wobble. Remember, you can use the randomize command for that, and maybe some notches and bevels and things like that as well. Before doing that, do make sure you've saved your work here, so if you make any mistakes, you can easily go back to it. Pause the video and have a go at that. Okay, so the first thing I'll do is use the randomize tool to create that kind of distortion and wobble. I'll press Ctrl plus, that will grow my selection and include these bits in between my bricks. Up to the mesh menu, transform and randomize. I'll bring that down to 0.01, and that's added just a tiny bit of distortion, which works nicely. Next, I'll go to vertex mode and just select a few vertices on some of the corners. I'll try and be fairly random, and then Ctrl Shift B to bevel those slightly. And if you look at the far left, it looks like I've selected the wrong one. So I'll undo that by pressing Escape, and you can see there I selected this one instead of this one. So I'll select the right one this time, Ctrl Shift B to bevel, and somewhere around there looks good. Now it is sensible to go in and select these verts just in here and GG to edge slide. So each of these, GG to edge slide, because they're verts that are right on top of each other, so we may as well optimize and join them all together. So that's looking quite nice. How about some notches? To create notches, I'm going to need some sort of cuts in here. I can't do a loop cut though, because it won't go through all the n-gons. So I'll undo that. I could use the bisect tool and do a big cut, but I don't really need to. I only need a small cut in some areas. So I'll zoom in a bit and I'll press K for the knife tool. And let's start on an edge here and go to this one here. And I'll finish off in a corner, up with this vertex over here and left click, and then press enter. It's always good to finish on a corner like that. Generally speaking, vertices that just start in the middle of an edge aren't particularly good practice. They work at the moment, so don't worry too much about it. But if you have the option, end your cuts on a vertex. That's slightly better practice. I'll go to edge mode with 2, select that edge, Ctrl B to bevel, bring that out slightly, and use the wheel to create a cut in there, and left click to set. Zoom in on that. 1 to go to vertex mode, GG to edge slide, and I've created a notch like this. I could even press GG and slide that up a little bit more to create a bit more of a notch. And I could press G then Z to move that down if I want a more vertical notch. So I'll do a couple more of those. Back into edit mode, K for the knife tool, and maybe from this side over here. And again, finish on a vertex. Down here, press enter, zoom in a touch, into edge mode, select that edge, Ctrl B to bevel. Already got my extra cut in there, so left click, into vertex mode, select that vertex, double G to edge slide, and maybe I'll press G the next to move that across to slightly more vertical like that as well. So just a couple of notches in there. I think that works quite nicely. So hopefully you got an okay with that. As always, make sure you've saved your work, ready for next time. In this lecture, we'll be taking a closer look at the mirror modifier and using that to mirror our wall. Okay, so here's where we got up to last time. And let's just quickly check what this will look like when I put my pillars in as well. So bring back the pillar on either side, and that's looking like a really nice wall. We do need to do the other side, so we can use this as a module, and we will want to join it to our pillars eventually. But first, let's think about creating that mirror on the back here. So I'll hide all the pillars, and whilst I'm in the outliner, I'll rename my plane to wall, and I'll put it into a collection a bit later on when I add the pillars on either side. But first, let's think about the mirror. So I'll come around to the front here, across to my modifiers, where the spanner or wrench is, add modifier, mirror. Now you may have noticed something has happened in here, but it's certainly not mirroring to the back here. If we look at the axes, we've got the y-axis going across there. So you would think that if I take off the x, turn on the y, that it would appear the other side along the y-axis. But it hasn't quite done that. It actually seems to have gone upwards, so along the z-axis. Now the reason for this can be quite confusing at first to beginners, but if I press N on my keyboard and go up to item, we can see that the rotation of our plane is 90 degrees. Because when I added the plane, it was flat on the floor, and I rotated it so it was upright. If I press Rx minus 90, we can see its starting point here and the rotation of the cube. And remember, you can type in 90 here to add rotation to objects in your viewport. And what the mirror modifier is doing is taking the local axes instead of the global axes. So the global axes, we've got the Y in green across there, and you can see that in our Cartesian coordinates up here. And if you want to be able to see that on your object, you can come up to your viewport gizmos here and turn on the object gizmos, and I'll turn on the move gizmos. We can see those axes now on our object, and I could use these to move my object around if I wanted to. If I come up to the top here though, and select on transform orientation and change that to local, notice that my axes now change. So this is the local axes, taking into account this rotation. So the mirror modifier is using this local y-axis. So ideally we want to remove this rotation. And you can see that I can't just press 0 here because that actually rotates my object. I'll undo that. I need to apply the rotation. Perhaps you remember how to do that. So we press Ctrl A and apply the rotation. That brings my rotation to 0. And notice that the gizmo here is the same as the global coordinates here. So when I change this back to global, you can see that my gizmo doesn't change. So I'll go up to my gizmos here and turn off the move now. And what I want you to do is catch up with me. You're adding a mirror modifier first and changing the axis to Y, and that won't immediately work, but once you apply your rotation, you should see something similar to mine because it's mirroring along the Y-axis. So pause the video, add your mirror modifier in the Y-axis, and apply the rotation with Ctrl A. Okay, so there's still a tiny bit more to do. It's a very thin wall. So if I go into edit mode, select all, and press G then Y, I can move it outwards slightly and create a nice thick wall like this. I might just want to bring back my pillars just to see what that looks like set against my pillars. It's possibly a little bit wide now, so G then Y, move that backwards just a touch, probably around there. What we haven't got now though is a join in the middle. I need to move this edge towards the other one. So 2 to go to edge mode, select that edge, G then Y to bring them together. But they're overlapping. Have a quick think why they're overlapping and how you would solve that problem. Well, we need to turn clipping on. When I click on that, press G then Y, they stick together. And when I left click and press G, they stay together like this. I'll right click to cancel that movement. Now I can do the same on the bottom, but we don't really need these faces on the bottom at all because they're not going to be seen. So I can press 3 to go to face mode and select those 2 faces and delete faces. So pause the video here, catch up with me and join your 2 mirrored sides together by moving that edge and turning clipping on so it sticks. Pause the video and have a go at that. Okay, so lastly, I'll just hide the pillars once more, just so they're not a distraction. If I go to edge mode again, with 2 on my keyboard and select this edge here, it's not serving any purpose. This is a flat face, so there's no point in having that edge there. Now I can't press delete and then edges because that deletes the edges and the faces attached. So I'll undo that. What I can do, if I press delete to go to the delete menu, I can dissolve the edge and that gets rid of the edge, which we don't need anymore. Now just to show, if I dissolve this edge here, which is serving a purpose of creating this right angle, by pressing delete and then dissolve edges, you can see that removing that edge removes that right angle. So I'll undo that and you can see it brings it back. So you can see that the other one was serving no purpose because it didn't affect our shape and therefore dissolving it made sense. So the last thing for you to do is to catch up with me and dissolve that top edge. And once you've done that, make sure you've saved your work ready for next time.